Hello and welcome to the GAA Museum Virtual Book Club. Each month the museum team will choose a well-known GAA book to read and review before hosting an online interview with the author. In October, we reviewed The First Sunday in September by Tadhg Coakley. Please enjoy this recording of the Q&A session. If you're not a member of the book club already, it's free to join at crokepark.ie/book club.
Hello everyone, welcome along to the October GAA Museum book Q&A with authors, and this month we're delighted to have read the first Sunday in September, so I have it here beside me, by Tadhg Coakley, which was the first ever novel we've done. I think this is our 9th or 10th book, and it's the first novel, so most of them have been historic. So a lovely change of pace and a real treat. And I'm delighted to welcome Tadhg to chat to us this evening. I have left the Q&A box open so you can type in your questions, and I'll keep an eye on that and work them into the conversation as we go along, so don't be shy. I suppose firstly to say thank you to Tadhg for joining me. I'm going to put him onto the screen now so you can watch Tadhg instead of me. You're very welcome, Tadhg. Thanks for joining us this evening.
Thanks very much, Julia, and thanks for picking the first Sunday in September. I'm really thrilled.
It's fantastic. We're delighted to have it. So I know we chatted maybe about, I suppose, setting the tone for the evening and maybe starting off with a little reading which you've chosen from the book. So if you want to get going, that'd be lovely.
Yeah, I'll do that. It's from a chapter called 5 Seconds, and it's the only time really we get into the game during the whole book. And it's a chapter, it's a story I almost didn't write because it's very difficult to describe matches in fiction without seeing cliched. So I had to really work hard to find a narrative arc, and the story takes place over 5 seconds, which is about the length of time it takes for a long clearance to go from the back line into the forward line. And,
wow.
And it covers that period of time, and it features a character we know. His name is Darren O'Sullivan. He's the talisman of the Cork team, and we know, I'm going to read the end of it, so we know a lot about him. We know he's going to score a goal. We know the Cork are going to win. We know he's going to go to America after the match in a few weeks and make a life there. And the last thing just to say about this, to introduce it, is I changed the style of the writing in this to reflect the game of hurling. So it's very tense, it's very fast, it's very fractured, there's a lot happening very, very quickly. So it's kind of different style from the rest of it. So there's 5 parts for 5 seconds. So I'm going to start at the end of part 4 and then read 5. So the ball is just about to reach down when this reading starts. So it's yours alone, and you're drifting in to meet it, and you're arching backwards, eyes on the ball. It's nearly here, and now everyone can see, the whole ground, the whole world can see, they can all see. And you're bracing your knees for the jump, just a small jump, and you know you will have to, but that's okay, that's fine. So you do, you jump slightly, and reach your long arm out, and you lean back, and here comes the ball, and there you are reaching, and millions of eyes are watching, and nobody in the world is breathing. Everything is moving now to the sound of a different heartbeat, slow and steady, every single thing, as the ball drops like it's coming home. It's home, home forever, sweetly, oh so sweetly home. 5. The ball sticks to your hand, but only for an instant, because in one movement you're landing, you're moving forward, you're gently tossing the ball up. Easily, languorously, you're just tossing the ball up. And now all the Cork people are rising off their seats, and the Clare people are wincing because everybody knows now. And you're twisting your torso, swinging the hurley back to your left, shortening it slightly in case there'll be a hook, but there won't be a hook. And the ball is in the air waiting, just waiting there for time to do its thing. And time does its thing to take a good look, so everyone watching can be in this moment forever, to savor the pain and the pleasure always. And time says, okay, that's enough, and the hurley is at the end of its backswing, and now you're powering it forward, adjusting your feet, bracing your knees, winding your hips for the hit, and the goalie is tiny, and the ash meets the leather, and the ball is flattened where the wood hammers it, and the ball is being driven forward, and it's a long high clearance from Jack Cashman into the Cork full forward line. Only 3 minutes left in this All-Ireland final, and Darren O'Sullivan is rising, and Sullivan catches, and Sullivan strikes, and it's a goal for Cork. And Darren O'Sullivan, and surely now the Lee McCarthy Cup is heading to Leeside with Darren O'Sullivan's second goal here today in Park and Croquig, and his 9th in this year's hurling championship. And the ball powers into the net, and it billows whitely. Ball and net, net and ball, and you're turning away grinning. Your arms stretched wide to meet the acclaim of the Cork fans in the Devon stand for this goal. And you'll think about this goal too many years from now when your grandchildren, Lee, the first of your 3 grandchildren, bless them, me as eldest girl, Sonny won't have kids. When Lee runs up to you all excited after she finds the little tattered box in one of your drawers in the beach house where your medal had lain forgotten all this time, to ask you about it. And you sit her up in your lap and show her the video on YouTube, the old video of all your 9 goals still there after all this time. And she says, "Is that you with the stick, Ganda?" And you say, "Yes, honey." And you make a brooch of your medal and give it to Mia. You're half Cork, you know. And she'll wear it at your funeral, and people will ask what that word is. And she'll say, "It's Éire, it means Ireland. It was Pops, he won it. And that's a harp in the middle, the symbol of Ireland." And she'll wear it again a couple of weeks later when Kim spreads your ashes into the sea, near where you like to be towards the end, weak from chemo, walking barefoot by the tide, hand in hand with little Lee, who likes to look for shells, and where you like to look out over the water, imagining home, thinking about your childhood, the only child of an unhappy marriage, your father coming and going between shouting matches, growing up tough, not caring, finding freedom in hurling and escape, finding the game come easy to you, liking the limelight, then loving it. Loving the sound in your ears after that goal, that sound. You can still hear that sound, can't you, after all the years, as you wheeled away, arms spread wide, Ray running up to hug you. Yes, as you walk the sandy beach hand in hand with your perfect little granddaughter. You think about those 5 seconds, your 5 seconds, waiting for that eternal slitter, falling blindly into your upstretched open arm, falling joyfully, forever falling from out of a clear blue September sky.
That was absolutely lovely. Thank you so much. It was a great start. It's interesting because when I read that, it took me, because it changes pace, I guess, from some of the other chapters. It took me a minute. I kind of figured what you're doing with the language is you're trying to match the intensity of hurling, which is, you know, you've done an amazing job of, because it sounds on paper like probably not a good idea to try to attempt. It's amazing. When you were writing it, I suppose, did you have any worries about how it would come across, or did you just go for it?
No, I did really. It was nearly one of the last chapters I wrote because I couldn't find a way into it. I did want to write something about from the point of view of someone, but I made 2 discoveries. I read a short story by an American writer called David Means, which had a very short narrative. And then I remembered a story by a writer called Tobias Wolff, and it's called A Bullet in the Brain. And that takes place from the moment a bullet enters his head to goes out the other side. And I said, okay, I have this idea now of 5 seconds, 1 puck of a ball. And once I got the second person right and the kind of tone, it wrote itself. It was the quickest story in the whole book, really.
Wow, because it's amazing, and you cover so much, because probably of all of the chapters that covers the most ground, and that you know what happens to him in the future as well. It was very interesting because it you know, I was like, does this really happen? Is he imagining this? So, yeah, really enjoyable. And as you said, this is really the only time I thought when I picked up the book, it was going to be kind of a description of a match, which it's really not at all. So this is really the only time we talk about the match, you know, in the whole thing. It even takes us a while in Sarah's story. We still don't actually know who's won. It's only after that then that we start to figure out that Cork did win because they were losing. So yeah, congratulations. Was there an order to the story, or did you have them written and then decide I'll put these this way? Because I guess it does work together, but they could maybe all work as individual short stories too.
That's right. No, there was a huge breakthrough really when I signed a contract with Mercier Press. The editor had a vision of it, and he said, Tadhg, I think this should be chronological. And he said, I think rather than individual stories, it's the story of a whole day.
Yeah.
And that was a huge breakthrough, because the first thing I had to do was write an opening chapter, and I wrote The Traitor, and that was the last one I wrote, because I didn't want to start with one step, because that's not very pleasant opening. And also I wanted to go back in time. So that takes place about 2 weeks before the match, but it also refers back to a match in All-Ireland final in the 1950s. So I wanted to have that kind of foreshadowing there. And then the book is in 3 parts, really. The first 4 stories take place before the game. The next 6 take place during the game, and 5 seconds is one of those, obviously. And the reveal, the big reveal, is in the story Dukas, which I might talk a little bit about more later, because that was the origin story of the book.
Oh, okay.
And then the big section, the end, if you like, there's 9 stories or chapters after the game. And the very last of those is 13 years after, and the second last is 5 years after. So that was a huge breakthrough, because I could see the book then when I realized that.
And Dukas then, as you say, was that written originally as a short story? Is that how it came about? Yeah.
Yeah, it was as an individual short story. I took early retirement from my job at CIT in 2006, and I signed up for an MA in creative writing in UCC. And I became obsessed with the short story form. I thought I was going to be writing a crime novel, and I had this idea. I read a story by another writer about a father and his son, and they're estranged, and they had a falling out. And I said, what about a story where a father is watching his son playing an All-Ireland final, and they're estranged because he gave him up for adoption as a baby? And that's the story came from that. And then I realized I had 2 more stories, the mother's story, Evelyn, and the son's story, Sean, the hurler himself. And then at the end of the course, you have to write a dissertation, which is about 16,000 words, about 5 short stories. And I wrote them about other characters that kind of came to me. And then I said, look, I'll keep going here and try and finish a book and make a book out of it. But the whole thing came out of Dukas originally.
Wow, yeah, because it's very powerful and a really interesting concept too, to have, like, obviously the father not knowing the background that Sean does know who he is. And, you know, I liked the link, and I love the way some of the links are very subtle. Like, I presume the girl with the blue ribbon who talks to Killian after the match is the girl that Sarah has seen. Yes. But you don't fully tell us that.
Oh, Saoirse Keane, that's right.
Yeah. So it's really good. Really clever. You know, the way it is linked together. And short stories are probably harder to write in a way, because you have to get your beginning, middle, of end in a shorter space of time. So it's obviously a style you like to write in.
I do. I became obsessed with it during that course, and once I knew the chronology, then I knew the links, and I knew that I wanted the book to end with Saoirse Keane 13 years into the future. And in fact, the journalist asked me once, did I have a favourite character? And I shouldn't, as a writer. I should love
children.
Children, yeah. But I do. Saoirse Keane is my favourite.
Right.
Because also, she's 8 when she goes to the match, and she's initiated, really. She gets hooked on it, and she becomes an artist. So she was maybe the character I identified with most as well.
Isn't that's interesting? I have a couple of questions. I'll just, before we get back to mine. So great book. I thought it was just going to focus on All Ireland Day, but had so many turns and twists. Was this your intention, and or did you find there was more of a need to tell all those other personal and deep stories rather than a synopsis of the match, which is kind of what we talked about, I guess.
Yeah, it really was, because you can't do it. And I even heard Donal Ryan, the novelist, talking about this on a podcast last week. It's very hard. If the reader knows it's not a real match, it's very hard to bring it alive and to get the tension, really. Like, I mean, you can imagine the tension, for example, in the All-Ireland football final this year for Mayo people. It's very hard to get that in a story when they know it's not real. So I had to go away from the players, and there's only 3 players really of the kind of 40 players who feature or whatever in the match. There's only 3 players, and I knew I had to have other characters as well.
Yeah,
to balance it out.
It kind of, you're right, I guess, about the match. You can't really write a fictional match and capture the passion. It reminded me a little bit of Alone It Stands about the Munster rugby, because, you know, that was nearly more about the players or the people that go into the match. You know, they were probably the bigger characters. So it did remind me a little bit of that. And I know you've written a piece as well about I suppose sport and GAA in particular not featuring in fiction. Do you want to tell us a little bit about your thoughts on that?
That's right. I mean, I think one of my motivations for writing this book was that I never read a book like this when I was kind of reading when I was growing up, or when I was in my 20s reading a lot. And I felt, you know, why not have a book? Like, you know, 1.5 million people go to GAA matches every year. It's a huge part of our culture, all sports really, not just hurling and football. But we don't seem to have a lot of fiction about it. And that's not the case in countries like America. There's dozens of books about baseball. And even in the UK, there's lots of novels about soccer, rugby, and so on. So that was one of my motivations there. Now, the good thing is that, I mean, there are technical difficulties, and we talked about those a little bit. You know, John McGahern did write some great short stories involving Gaelic football, and Donal Ryan puts hurling into most of his books as well. But it's difficult, you know. Publishers aren't keen on it. You know, mostly novels are read by women, and a lot of women are interested in sport, but a lot of women aren't either as well. And men tend to prefer reading non-fiction novels as well, so there are difficulties there. But this year the good news is there were 4 novels published: Penenke by Ronan Hessian, Emma Ryan's Holding Her Breath, Adrian Duncan's Midfield Dino, and Paul Howard's Normal Sheeple, which is a Ross O'Carroll Kelly book, and they all feature sport, different sports. So I'm hoping really that this will be a start of a new development in Irish fiction.
Yeah, because it's such a big part, even if, you know, you're not a sports fan, it does feature, you know, on everywhere. You know, it's half of our newspapers, and, you know, every hour on radio and everything. I have a couple of more questions, so I'll get through them. The characters are so believable. Tadhg seems to have great insight into life around GAA and local communities. Yeah. Was much of this coming from his personal experiences?
Yes, I did. I played a lot of hurling, especially when I was young, and I actually played in Croke Park, would you believe, 5 times. Wow. But I was young. I played on the Cork minor team in 1979, and we had 2 matches. We won the All-Ireland that year. So I think that combined with my, and I played with my home club Mallow for many years as well, and played for UCC and my secondary school, St. Coleman's College. So I loved hurling especially, and I always loved reading, and I always thought, why can't these be combined, you know?
Yeah.
So it was a lot from my experience, but having said that, I had to be very careful that I didn't involve Mallow, that any of the characters might say, oh, that's so-and-so, I know who that is, or that's himself. You know, I was terrified of that.
I think all Irish novelists probably have a fear of that when they're writing about a small town, because it's inevitable we will do that. And another one, this is a funny question actually, being a Cork man, was it inevitable that Cork would win in the end?
No, and that's we have one now for a long time as well. The reason Cork won, and a journalist asked me lately if I would do anything different now 3 years later, and I probably would have Cork lose, but because I wrote Dukas first, and there's a pivotal scene in that where the birth father of the hurler sees his father, the man who brought up to her, hug him at the end and kiss him, and he realizes he can never do that. He'll never have that. And that was a pivotal moment. But I think if I was starting out again, I would definitely have Cork losing, because loss is a more interesting thing in fiction than it is. I think even non-fiction too, but I would. So no, and I'll tell you a funny story. A friend of mine from County Louth, when I wrote the book first, he says, Tadhg, he says, so you wrote a book about Northern Ireland, and do Cork get to the final? I said, they do, John. He said, so it's fiction. And then he says, and do you win? I said, we do. So it's fantasy. So it wasn't inevitable.
And talking about the losing aspect, I suppose the chapter when I kind of knew what was coming, and I knew there was one focusing on the Clare dressing room and the losing Clare. I thought I was going to, because I do have a soft spot for, the photos of the loser, and, particularly in sport, they're very powerful. But you ended up really not liking him that well. I thought I was going to love that player. So that was really interesting. It kind of, I was a bit conflicted reading it, because obviously he delved a little bit into his past, and there was reasons why he was the way he was, but he wasn't very likable at all.
No, he wasn't. I wanted him to be a loser in every sense of the word, really. Especially with relation to his father. There was a lot of father-son relationships, but also his girlfriend and so on. So that was a tough one to write, and I had to be careful because this is a Clare player, and I thought, and so I had to be very careful with his name too, with all the players' names, that you don't make a mistake like that. But that's one of the tougher stories, all right.
Yeah, but very, very enjoyable. And the second, now I can't think, I'll have to look at my chapters here. Where are we? So One Step, that's probably my favourite in the whole book. For a number of reasons. I think the writing's brilliant. The scene where he gets sick is so descriptive and disgusting, but very good, and your language is fantastic. And he seems like a character maybe we all might know of, or has, or there are elements of him in people we know. Was that a difficult one to write?
It was really, and again, especially because it was so early, but I did want to, deal with difficult issues, and he's a player who can't cope with not being an intercounty player anymore, so he develops a gambling addiction, and we know from real players who've come out about this that it's a problem out there, and I mean, there's a little bit of hope at the end of it, and he kind of gathers his, love for Clare really at the end as well, but he's one of the characters really who's kind of fallen through the cracks a bit, and the short story form really does suit those characters more so than like just the great heroes and all the well balanced characters who get on well with their family and their communities. It's very difficult to write fiction about those characters.
Yeah, and Connor is another interesting character. And just as you're talking there about Cork, if you had changed the end that Cork lost, I think maybe his character would have been interesting to see his reaction to that. Like, that would have changed a lot of the stories if Cork had lost.
Yeah, it really would. It really would. And Connor is another character, and like he appears first in the fourth chapter from the point of view of his girlfriend Sarah from London. And I wanted an outsider who didn't really know kind of what was happening, because any of us who've been lucky to experience All-Ireland finals, we know what it's like, but she didn't really have a clue what's going on. When I wrote that story, I realized, okay, I have another story from the point of view of Connor, which appears near the end. It's a phone call, and then another one from his parents as well. So
and the device he used to write the parent story was interesting. The is awake thing. I loved that. I thought it was really good. Sorry, go on.
He's not a very sympathetic character either, the father, and he has a diagnosis of Parkinson's disease. Yeah. But I thought it was interesting that his wife's future plans are very different from his future plans, and so I wanted to kind of portray that.
And a lot of the stories running through them have, I suppose, maybe it's when you just know what people are thinking, you know, it's very interesting. You know, you had maybe Evelyn, who on the outside is the lady around the golf club, and you know, it was interesting that maybe exterior you know, personas are totally different to what's going on behind closed doors. That kind of went through maybe a few of them as well.
It did a story about Dinny Young as well, the coach of the Cork team, who has a tragedy in his past that he can't get over or forgive himself about.
Yeah, he was a likable character.
Yeah, he was, and you know, I bring his wife and daughter as well, and you know, it's very difficult to write about happy occasions, you know, so you have to put in some kind of a twist.
But I suppose a lot of Irish fiction and plays and drama, it is all about tragedy, and we tend to do that well. So combining that with hurling, I suppose, does seem maybe uniquely Irish. Was there, have you had much reaction maybe from people, readers from overseas or internationally, who have no idea about hurling, but I'm sure loved the writing?
Yeah, I have, even though some of the language and so on, you know, I had to translate maybe some of the kind of Corkisms, especially. You know, what do you mean when you say such a thing? And even with one of the editors I worked with on the book, she said, "Wouldn't the person say this or rather this?" So I said, "No, in Cork this is the way we speak, and you have to have this kind of colloquialisms." And the cadence that we speak as well, it's very different from in other countries. But I did read a lot of sports fiction from other countries, and I was influenced by those as well. So, you know, there, if you don't know the game, like I had a lovely email from a Canadian writer lately, and he's from Ireland, but he's giving it to all his in-laws in Canada. He says, "But I'm going to have a PowerPoint presentation and explain the game and how a puck out happens and how you score and all around and all out of final," because, you know, people in other countries are amazed that we have an amateur game, you know, played by all amateur women and men, but we've 82,000 people at finals and 1 million people watching on, and it's a huge part of our culture. And they say, "Wait a minute, they don't get paid?" It's amazing, and we take it for granted. Well, I don't know if we do really, but we're very lucky to have it, that's for sure.
Yeah, we get that in the museum too, particularly maybe Americans, where, you know, American football and the money that, you know, that's involved in that, and then you see this very skillful sport within this huge stadium, you know, and yeah, so it is amazing. But it may be a reason as well why maybe hurling isn't featured in novels so much. Maybe publishers feel like for translating to international audiences. Having said that, I loved The Scandal, which is basically about ice hockey, which I know absolutely nothing about, but I still loved
me too. It was brilliant. And I think if I am going to go back to sports fiction again, I'll walk around a village or a small town rather than an intercounty scene, because I think that's universal as well. And even the question there about Cork winning, you know, if people know it's about Cork, do people really from Tipperary or Kilkenny, are they interested? But if it's a village, it doesn't matter what county, we all know those teams and the passion if we get to a county final, all the rivalries and what could happen and so on. So I think if I go back again to it, and I hope I will, I'll do a club, a small club.
Yeah, that would be interesting. And that was The Scandal was sort of based around that. Yeah. A couple more questions here. Would you consider revisiting any of these characters in future books?
That's a good question. I really would. And I think the main characters would be Tim Collins, Sean Cullity, and Evelyn Collins. That trio. A few people have said to me that they really thought the book should have been about them, and it should be a novel, you know, about their situation. And you could have, you know, the opening chapters when she gets pregnant and she's kind of forced to give the baby up for adoption, and then Tim develops a drink problem, and you know, she has a breakdown and so on. So that's something I could do. There's a great American writer, Elizabeth Strout, and out of Kitteridge, but new book out now, and it's her third book about this woman, Lucy Barton, in different situations. So I might go back and visit that and turn it into a novel with, you know, each chapter from each of the three characters' point of view. And it could have a similar ending to the way it does now, that they win and, you know, they are reconciled. But I would think about that, yeah, and that could be, it'd be a different book really, but I think they're three compelling stories.
Yeah, and even take the sport out of it, it's an interesting, you know, story, and the whole yeah, it's a good concept. And a total different group of people in the book then is Anya, and that character. Did you find it hard? Like, I presume it would be pretty much out of your comfort zone to write about a character like Anya, which I liked her. And I, you know, I don't think it was tokenistic. I thought it was really well done, because and if you're going to do that, you're going to have to, I suppose, do it right, because you will get criticised otherwise.
Yeah, no, it was really. I mean, even writing from a woman's point of view, but you know,
yeah,
from a woman's point of view, it's very difficult. So I was very lucky. I was in a writers group when I finished my MA in creative writing. And there were two women in that, and I got them to vet that
brilliant.
story very well and say, look, would she say this? How would she feel here in this situation? And, you know, they asked me to cut a few of the scenes. There was one sex scene, and they said, no, so I did, but I was nervous about it because, you know, you can be accused of cultural appropriation. I mean, you know, she's my culture and everything, but so, but she did come to me, and a few people have said to me after, you got that okay.
Yeah, no, it was good, and I think a good part of the book as well is place. And I suppose if you know Dublin, or I wouldn't know Cork that well, but you know, the references that are gas, like even the Daybreak shop, which is where we turn into the museum. So, you know, you're really right there, and the hotels, and you gave them specific names. I think that worked. Was that a decision rather than, I suppose, being obscure about where people were?
No, I think it's very important if you're going to be specific about places. And I actually, to help me with that and to describe the dressing rooms, for example, I did a tour. I did a tour of the museum in 2017, I think. And I walked, because Anya walks out of the game before it's over.
Yeah.
I walked around the back of the whole stadium, found that Daybreak. I kind of followed her footsteps. I went back out onto, I forget what street it was, really heading towards the canal, and an ambulance went past, and I said, okay, an ambulance, that's good. No,
wow.
So, but I do feel, and in my second book as well, which is a crime novel set in Cork City, you really have to get locations right, unless you make it a fictional place. Also.
Yeah, no, it was good, and even I thought in the dressing room, the description was great. Like, you were there. Now I would know them obviously from the tours we do here, but there was a really good detail. Like, I think you had a reference to match program which hadn't been opened. Like, we would find them around. You know, that was perfect. Really, really good. I have two more questions in. One from Mary. Did your training and the discipline you learned from sport help you with your writing? So I suppose going back to your playing days.
Yeah, I think it does. I'm writing a book of essays about sport at the moment, and one of the essays is about how I compare the actual craft of writing. I mean, physically, it's very different from playing sport or any other art, but I see the kind of preparation similar, all the kind of work you have to do behind the scenes, the nerves, and no, it did really. And I mean, okay, I wasn't a very disciplined person. I think writing is something you have to work at. You're not going to be inspired. So I get up and go to the desk every morning, and, you know, for every 20,000 words I write, I reject 15,000. So you really have to work at it, and, you know, in the way you have to do as part of a team, or train and develop skills and keep going. And I often say to younger writers, you know, if you want to get good, they said, you have to write every day. And I said, well, the more often you write, you're developing muscles in the way that you're kind of training, and you're solving problems as well. So it does take discipline, for sure.
Yeah. And you managed to bring, I suppose, different disciplines into the book. So was that a decision? I suppose sometimes you're writing in the third person, sometimes you're writing in the first. Then there's different styles, you know, the awake chapter, or you have the style of the 5 seconds. Like, that's quite hard. That's a lot of different styles to get right, which you managed to do.
It is, and a lot of that is practice, you know. So I would have written some of the stories from the first person and say, oh, that's not working, try it in the third person. or an other
Makes a
situation.
huge difference, like, doesn't it? If you do that, if you switch it.
Huge difference. You kind of really only know, I think, once you see it after. And, you know, being in the writers group was great. They would have told me as well. You know, so the Duca's story, for example, is it's in the first person, but he's addressing his son. He's talking to the son. And then I mirrored that with Evelyn, his wife's story, because she goes to a graveyard and she's addressing her daughter who died. So, but you know, you have to be very conscious of all these. What the reader is going to think as well when you're actually writing.
Yeah, because when I started, and you know, the first story is third person, and you're in the hospital, and the with Bill, and then it did jump, and I was like, "What's going on? Who's this?" But then I really liked it. Like, I enjoyed that, and I would read a lot of fiction. It's quite unusual, so I did really enjoy it. But I think you would have to have a light touch to do it. Like, you know, it worked. I don't think everybody could try it.
I know, and well, it's about, for me, all fiction is about character and voice. And one thing I learned from writing this book, actually, in my second book, which was a crime novel, as I said, I had about 60,000 words of that written in the first person. And I realized when I wrote this book that that's not going to work, because I wanted other voices in as well. So I had to write it, I had to change the whole 60,000 words into the third person so I could put in other characters and see their voices as well. And I developed the confidence from this book to do that in my second book as well.
Wow, it's yeah, I presume authors have preferences, but we don't. When we get a book, we don't see all of these actual. It's pretty like scientific, nearly, going back through something and rewriting it like that.
Yeah, and a lot of writers would say they're no good at the first person, or they can't do third person, and like first person gives you a great intimacy. I mean, you can get it with a close third person as well, but first person will get you kind of. You know, I mean, you can get in the mind as well, but the trouble with first person is it's very difficult to put other points of view, and every scene in a novel, if it's in the first person, has to involve that character.
Yeah, and difficult in a crime novel, I guess, because
it is, because I wanted the voice of some victims and one of the bad guys and stuff like that.
Yeah. Too. Yeah, interesting. And you talked a little bit about dialogue already. I want to just go back to it. When I did dabble in a little bit of writing, I found dialogue absolutely horrific. Like, I can understand why, you know, some novelists, you know, choose a diary style, or like, I think that's a great idea. But like you've done it really well. How do you approach that?
Well, I mean, I write it first. I try to develop a voice for the character, as I said. But then I also, when I write something, I read it out loud straight away. The conversation, you know, almost acting it out with the two characters who are doing the dialogue, and that was very important, especially in the chapter near the end, which is the phone call, because it's very hard to carry a phone call through the whole through. It's called "Can You Talk" with Conor Dinley. Now. There's one or two short stories that I was able to read to pick that up as well. So you copy the good people who do things as well, and you pick like Roddy Doyle. If you read Roddy Doyle and read it out loud, you get it's really good. So you know you have to learn from the masters.
Yeah, it is. It's good to hear that, you know, that you do think about it, and it's not all just I'm an amazing writer and this just happens. Like, it is a process, no matter how good you are.
Yeah.
I have another question here from Joe. Tadhg didn't pussyfoot about on the gambling issue, where no sympathy was given, almost opposite to what seems to be the case nowadays, particularly with sports stars. Was he conscious of people being upset at the character's maybe lack of empathy? Good question.
Yeah, I was. I mean, I have a lot of sympathy for him, but you have to portray these problems realistically as well, and not shy away from it. I mean, you know, tragically, it is a problem in society, and it's something we're going to have to, I think, tackle a little bit more. But no, I am conscious of that, and again, because Seamus was a clear character, but it didn't really matter where he was from.
No.
He was a very specific character, but it's a universal problem. Any kind of addiction is really. So, but I was a bit hard on him, all right, you know.
But I did like him, you know. It wasn't like Killian. I liked him a lot more than I liked Killian, to be honest.
I did too.
I'm just going to go back. I have a couple of questions here. Yes, now this is a totally random question, but it did spring to my mind. Going back to Sarah, why did Conor give her the ticket to go to the match? Like, you surely just, if you knew him, you'd be raging. I think that was the only thing that I thought maybe that wouldn't happen in real life, but I'm sure it does.
I think it does too, and I think he wanted to impress her a bit, and she was very impressed then when she met a fictional billionaire in the lift up to the hospitality suite.
Very good.
She thought, oh my God, you know, the billionaires are here, and so on. So it was partly that, and it was also I wanted to get her in this situation because I wanted an outsider, as I said,
yeah.
who didn't really know what was going on. So I had to get her to the match somehow. So I had to give her a ticket. But he doesn't know the secret she's carrying as well, and what she's going to, the bombshell she's about to drop to. So. Yeah,
I enjoyed that storyline. It was good. Another one here. Felt like I was going to the match. Yes, I did too. All described down to a T. The nerves in the pit of your stomach, all the different emotions people go through on match day, and all the individual stories in tandem with the big game. I read this in 2 days, and every story was so believable. Brilliant book. Yeah, it really was, and it wasn't on my radar at all. So I'm so glad we chose it, and I did love that. I loved the sightings from a few people. I think, oh, yeah, you see Croke Park from her, and then, you know, Sarah, and it was a lovely way to describe, you know, it's totally different to going to, say, a Premier League match, you know, where there's guards and your police and you're, you know, depending on where you're going, like everyone mingling. I think you captured that brilliantly, and it's probably not really in any novels.
No, and the other thing is, it's one of the great rituals of Ireland, you know. I remember Micheál Hartig saying that he thinks the national holiday should be, no, he'd be biased and I'm biased too, of the day of the All-Ireland hurling final. And we should celebrate that on the first Sunday in September, which is another thing, that the title of the book was the first Sunday in September. And what happened when it was published in 2018?
Our movie in the museum is called September Days, so we've also had problems with those
I loved it because there was 4 finals in September. There was the hurling, the camogie, the men's football, and the women's football, and I'd love it to go back to that, but you know, COVID obviously had a say in that as well. So
I think it's never fully, because the first year it was supposed to change, the Pope came and that changed it. So there's been a few different things. Yeah. Another question here. When you were ghostwriting with Dennis, is it Colin you say in Cork? Yeah. Was it hard to suppress your own voice, and did you change your writing style for that book? Yes, it's talking about your other work.
Yeah, no, I did really. It's very hard as a novelist, and Dennis is such a humble man, but he has a great memory, and you know, he achieved so much, but it was a different skill. Now, I spoke to a couple of other people who had done ghostwriting, including Mary White, who you had already.
Yeah, brilliant.
She wrote a brilliant autobiography. And I spoke to her, and the voice is critical. And I think I slipped up a couple of times. But the great thing is then that Dennis, when he read it, he said, "Tadhg, I don't think I say that." And that was great then. And I said, "That's gone." So, yeah. But no, the great thing about Dennis is that he's such a wonderful person, and he's done so much in his life. The real difficulty in that was structuring the book about his job, his career, his family, and so on like that. But it's hard as a novelist not to be throwing in dramatic stuff, you know.
Yeah, and you can't just say this happened if it didn't. And what other work, I suppose, had you always wanted to write a book, and then since is the first Sunday in September your first novel?
It is my first book, and I did really. And when I took early retirement, I took the opportunity to do the MA in creative writing. Now, I thought I was going to write this crime novel, but whatever it takes. And that was published last year, so that's my second book. And now it does feature a detective in Cork who's a former inter-county hurler as well. So I did put a bit of hurling in that, but it's not really about that. It's a crime novel. So that was great to get that done as well. And then
very different from the first Sunday in September, you know?
Very different, really. But as I say, if I go to sport, and it's much more difficult to get sports fiction published than crime writing, because crime fiction has a great tradition in Ireland and there's lots of readers, you know, whereas it's not so common. The Dennis Collin book then came because I was approached by Liam Hayes, who's the publisher of Hero Books, former Meath footballer and editor. And he said, look, would I do this? And my first instinct was, I was very busy with the crime novel, doing edits on that. But when I met Dennis, I realized I had to do it. And also Dennis was such a lovely man, but he was part of the Cork Trina Row team in the 1970s. And they were heroes of mine growing up.
Wow, yeah.
I was then. So, and I'm really glad, and he's very happy with it. So it's great to have it out there.
I suppose if you weren't interested in the subject or the person wasn't maybe in, you know, you didn't get on, it would be much more difficult to do it.
It was,
yeah. And anything coming up then in the next while?
I've two books actually on the go at the moment. I have a book of sports essays, which I'm hoping will be published that year, and that it's part a memoir of my own kind of experiences in sport, you know, which weren't extraordinary or anything. And it's part a critique of sport. So I write about the emotion of sport, you know, my time at games when I was 8, watching Cork play and the excitement of that and my memories of that. But also I write essays about the dark side of sport, about toxic masculinity, about the kind of professionalism, you know, and all those kind of things with some sports washing and so on. So sexism. So I write all those essays, and I write for the Irish Examiner as well on sport as well, so it feeds into that as well. So that's
brilliant, though. It's not your standard, you know, sports. It's different, and there's certainly room for it. You know, I think in Ireland there's a huge appetite. I remember studying in college kind of that wave of new journalism, you know, and there was Hunter S. Thompson has an essay about the Kentucky Derby, which is brilliant. But like, there's a lot of ways of writing about sport that would appeal to people who don't necessarily like sport. So there's definitely, and you're, you know, if you're a good writer, I think.
Yeah, the social aspects of it especially, you know, why is it so important to people? Why does it generate so much emotion to people? Like, why are people so caught up in it? And then, you know, are they caught up in it too much?
Yeah.
Like issues like gambling and so on, you know, I write about that too. So I'm hoping it'll be published next year anyway. And I have a follow-up to the crime novel as well. This guy, Collins, he's going to appear as well, hopefully at the end of next year.
And can I ask you for just, it's not really on our topic we're talking about, but for the crime novel, do you know what's going to happen before you start?
I do have a good idea of the ending, which is really important because it allows you to get there. Like, if you don't know what's going to happen, you could be putting him there, or this happened, and then you say, oh no, I don't want that. You have to rewrite. Now, there's a lot of rewriting, but I have a good idea what's going to happen in the end. So then you can plot your way to get there. And very often in the first Sunday in September, I knew the actual scene at the end, or the line, and then it makes a big difference because you can find a way to get there then.
Wow, and I suppose is it very different writing a novel like that than writing the first Sunday in September, where it's kind of linking stories rather than it's I suppose it's a different process.
It is, and it's 100,000 words, so it's a long slog, really. You have to kind of narrow it down to scene by scene, or little plot element by plot element. Otherwise, you think, oh God, I'll never get this done. You know, and also this book like is 100,000 words, whereas this book was only 60,000 words. You know, they're more literary books tend to be shorter really than the genre books. Yeah, so.
And are you dropping clues for your reader, or throughout, or do you deliberately do that? I don't know if crime novelists do that, or we think we're all figuring it out.
My first one isn't a whodunit really, so you know it's a quiz between these two criminals, but you don't know what's going to happen. So I wasn't dropping hints there really. In the second one, you kind of know it's about a murder and you kind of know who the killer is as well. But the question is, will they find him? Will they get him? Will that happen? You know, so because you're right, you do have to have tension at all stages, and you have to ramp it up and ramp it down. So there is a different technique there.
Well, it's definitely one of the busiest retirements I've ever heard of, I'll give you that. And my last question, Inka, unless there's anyone that has any more, is I think this first Sunday of September would be a fantastic play. Have you thought about that?
I have really, and especially around the Dukas kind of theme. I have really, and someone gave me some good advice that if I was going to write a play, and I was thinking about this, I got sidetracked and other things, but he said that, you know, you mentioned Alone It Stands, where you can have actors playing different kind of people. So I could go down that road, all right. I think there's potential there. I've never written a play, so it would be a big learning curve for me, but I'd love to see my characters on the stage, you know.
I think it would be brilliant. It was a thing that struck me. Not all books, you know, would be good on screen or stage, but I thought it definitely had the makings of a play. So yeah, and it did remind me of Alone It Stands a lot. But thank you so much. I don't think we've any more questions coming in, so I think we'll leave it there. Thank you again for joining us, and I'm glad you took time. I know everyone is busy, so and thanks to everyone who joined us. We have loyal readers and always great questions. So there was a lovely questions there as well. Thank you very much. And we'll announce our next book tomorrow, and hopefully see you all in November. And I'm off to get your next book now as well, Tadhg. So thanks very much.
Julianne. Thanks everyone for looking on. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.